Hmm. Uh, huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Reuben Olson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I'm one of your hosts, Reuben Olson.
I am your other host, Taylor Field.
Welcome back for another wonderful, wonderful topic. Today, Taylor's going to be taking us off on some cool things. But before we dive into that topic, I believe we have some plugs to get out of the way first.
Good old plugs. Yes, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca. You can send us a message and just say hi, have any stories you want to talk to us about. CryptidClues@gmail.com. You can also find us on our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and you can get ad-free early episodes and some exclusive episodes on our Patreon feed. But without further ado, we're just going to get into this topic. This is a very interesting topic, and it came to me when I was doing a whole bunch of documentary watching on national parks, and the Grand Canyon popped up. I thought, okay, what's so wacky about the Grand Canyon? And then they started talking about all these different legends and different paranormal aspects associated with it. And I thought, okay, this is fascinating. I need to deep dive into this location. I'm curious, have you heard of anything mysterious going on with the Grand Canyon, Reuben?
No, I've never heard about anything out there. I assume there's probably like some UFO stuff or something, but from what little you've told me about it, it was not what I was expecting at all. Only thing I can really point out, Grand Canyon, first thing that comes to mind is like the glass walkway or something. That's terrifying. I wouldn't want to stand on that.
Yeah, I have been there. Me and my dad actually were able to go to the Grand Canyon. We flew over. We got to see the Hoover Dam and everything, and it's an incredible location. I don't doubt it when the people fall off that edge. It's
Oh my
a steep
goodness.
edge.
Over at the Hoover Dam, you'd be like, oh man, damn.
Oh, there you go. First pun of the night. But yeah, it's an incredible location, and it's truly a wonder to see. And I mean, back then I took it with a grain of salt. It just went over my head about the idea of there being anything really mysterious going on with this location. But there are paranormal aspects that people experience there. Just off the top of my head, there were two airplanes that took off at different times, and somehow they met at like the same altitude, and they like smashed into each other above the Grand Canyon. And I mean, unfortunately, it was horrible. Everyone died. This was
That's terrible.
like decades and decades ago. But people have just kind of felt that there is a certain manifestation of energy and unknown elements at play in the Grand Canyon.
Like
And
you
there is
just get like a
also-
funny feeling when you're out there.
Yeah, and even when planes have been flying above, they've noticed, okay, it got really bad for one specific airline. I found out that there was stewardesses working on the airplane, and all of a sudden they would see in the reflection people, like apparitions that were from that crashed airplane that was just forming in the plane.
No.
And I thought, that's where it really set me sideways, thinking, holy smokes. So there's something really prominent here. And moving on from that, I thought, okay, let's...
You're moving on from the creepy ghosts on the airplane already?
Yeah.
Oh
I
no,
know.
what are we getting into?
That was just one of the brief things. And probably that's not the only thing. Like that is a prominent thing I've noticed with other locations too. I was looking into that association with other plane crashes. This is a common thing. Planes flying over like crash sites, there will be like a common what is the word I'm looking for? Similar relevant association with other crash sites where people on these planes will see
Like a
dead
crossover
spirits.
almost.
Yeah, and I don't mean like, oh, this plane crashed in the Grand Canyon and they see those members of that plane crash miles away on another plane flying over. But just like plane crashes here in this area, and you have another plane crashes over there, and just the respectable people that had passed away in those sites appear in apparitions or manifestations on the planes flying above. It's just wacky stuff, and it just adds to the power that can kind of generate in these locations.
Yeah, you were talking about energy earlier, and I'm usually not one for that kind of topic, but it kind of brings me back to when we were talking about American Murder, Family Next Door, that Netflix one, and we kind of dived into like, well, what are ghosts? How do ghosts work? There's like so many different theories. I believe one of the things we kind of touched on was like, well, what if it's like a really hard impression energy kind of a reading thing? Like maybe ghosts are just like a real life playback of a previous event or something that happened, and just when certain scenarios line up, the right energies or vibrations or whatever you want to say is out there is happening, it just appears. So a plane flying over the crash site in a very desolate area that doesn't have much going on is enough to trigger like a little apparition-y ghost person to come up and be like, ooh, boo.
Basically, that episode, I believe it was episode 8, that remains to be one of my most favorite episodes that we had, like in just pure discussion. It was one that, I mean, watching that documentary on that situation, I really got connected with that story, and like you did a great job spearheading it. You managed to direct and like educate me on everything and the different elements that were unfolding with that story and how the paranormal actually connected to it, when you don't get that sense at all when watching the actual documentary. So that's a great episode. I highly recommend go check it out, listen to it. But yeah, with this though, the Grand Canyon, I'm going to start off with one, I wouldn't even dub them as a cryptid, but a type of culture that's associated with the Grand Canyon. And I hope I'm pronouncing this right. The Hopi? Say Hopi. Hope that's correct. The Hopi Indians.
I feel like we almost need to look that up and correct it.
I know. It's Hopi. So
Hopi.
In association with them, there is the Ant people. And the Hopi Indians, did you get a term?
I'm looking it up. I'm also stuck on ant people there. I'm thinking of Bug's Life now.
I know. Bug's Life, ants, like it's just...
That can't be what you're referring to at all.
The ant people? Oh, absolutely. And I think I have some information here that's gonna.
It's Hopi. I looked it up.
It's Hopi. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The Hopi Indians basically have lived in the high desert of northern Arizona for thousands of years. This whole landscape was the place where the Hopi gods directed them to build a number of villages, and basically what we today would call like stone apartment or complexes. This is kind of what they would build. I think the term is like a pueblo. And it's basically here where the Hopis managed to flourish and, growing corn, beans, squash, all that kind of stuff. And again, they didn't have a lot of rainfall and they didn't have much irrigation, but they were able to grow these things.
We're still talking about the Grand Canyon, right? They were growing all this stuff out there? Because I just picture it as like completely desolate.
Well, more like the northern Arizona. So not necessarily right in the Grand Canyon, but just kind of within proximity.
Okay.
So the ant people legend of the Hopi? Mm-hmm. Okay. The Hopi people starts off with basically a destruction caused by fire. This is the start of this legend. It's so cataclysmic, it affects the entire earth. It's a fire. Shortly after, a second catastrophic disaster is caused by ice. Now, you can associate, people speculate that, okay, maybe the first one was like a meteorite, a volcanic eruption, something like that, followed by maybe the Ice Age or something along those lines. During these two global cataclysms, the members of the Hopi tribe were guided by an oddly sized cloud during the day and a moving star at night that led them to a sky god named Satangnang. That's how the legend kind of progresses.
Okay.
The sky god took them to the ant people. In Hopi, Anu Sinom, the ant people then escorted the Hopi into subterranean caves where they found refuge and sustenance to survive. So they lived underground, and this is supposedly where the Grand Canyon area is. In this legend, the ant people are portrayed as generous and industrious, giving the Hopi people food when supplies ran short and teaching them the merits of food storage, etc. Additionally, another legend says that the reason why the ants have such thin waist today is because they once deprived themselves of provisions in order to feed the Hopi people.
So do they actually, like these ant people, were they like humanoid ants standing up like in, God forbid, the Ants movie? The one with the big Z in it?
Apparently, there were like humanoid like ants. So this is where you can kind of see or tie the ant people to Egypt. In the year 1351 to, or from, I guess, 1351, 1334 BC before Christ, some depictions show cases of an elongated skull like the shape of an ant's head, almond-shaped eyes and the neck like an ant mandibles as well, spindly arms and legs like those of an ant, and the upper body resembles the ant's thorax, while the lower body mirrors an ant's abdomen. There was an Egyptian, I believe by the name of Akhenaten, who was depicted as having a body type specifically comparable to the pharaoh ant, also known as Morium pharaonis, which originated in West Africa. It also has an elongated head, yellow to reddish brown body, and a darker abdomen with a stinger. So,
You know, really interesting right now, just hearing about all this stuff for the first time. You're talking about the ant people, and on a subject of aliens, it actually made me think of the mantis race of aliens.
mantis race, give me a brief rundown on this.
You ever hear of those abduction stories where people are like, they wake up and there's grays and stuff around them, and then there's giant praying mantis people behind the grays, like overseeing everything?
No.
I definitely recommend looking into that, just because with, I mean, the giant humanoid insect-like alien, you could probably easily mistake that for an ant person as well if it was somewhere else and you didn't know about aliens.
Absolutely. Well, it's kind of connected where there's supposed to be, and I'll be getting into that next topic, a lot of technology associated with these legends. That's very interesting that you mentioned that. A lot of the depictions of these ant people are showcased on, glyphs on the walls and carvings and that sort of stuff, where you have it depicted in ancient Egypt and you have it depicted in Arizona, which is very peculiar. That's
Jeez.
a long distance.
You've got me feeling pretty antsy about this. And speaking of feeling antsy, I would say it's time for an ad break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry about that sharp ad break there. I know we're terrible with that, but I love it so much.
That was a sharp pun, actually. We're sharper than the ad break.
Carry on, Taylor. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, it's all good. So, in 1909, the Phoenix Gazette published an article about an explorer named Kincaid and what he discovered. And I quote, "Nearly a mile underground, about 1,400 feet below the surface, the long main passageway has been delved into to find another mammoth chamber from which radiates scores of passageways like spokes of a wheel." Now, this explorer, Kincaid, he reports that he was out, checking out the Grand Canyon, and he came across this tunnel. He went into this cave in this tunnel, and then it branched off into a whole massive network that could have housed tens of thousands of individuals down here. Several hundred rooms had been discovered, reached by passageways running from the main passageway, one of them having been explored for about 850 feet and another for 630 feet. The recent finds include articles which have been known as native to this country, and doubtless they had their, origins. War weapons, copper instruments, sharp edge and hard as steel indicate the high state of civilization reached by these strange people that resided within this whole network of caves. And then there were riches as well that were kind of found. So when I say riches, I mean more like idols and tokens along those lines.
Not like a dragon's hoard of gold and shiny things.
No, not really. Definitely shiny things, but not really. Not like Smaug and the Misty Mountains or anything like that on any like dwarven treasure. And I quote, "The idol or image of people's gods sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower or lily in each hand. The cast of the face is oriental. The idol almost resembles Buddha. The scientists are not certain as to what religious worship it represents. It is possible that this worship most resembles the ancient people of Tibet. Among the other finds are vases or in urns and cups of copper and gold made with very artistic design." This is where a lot of this information kind of gets a little convoluted, and I was really trying to navigate and source a cohesive chunk of content here. And in the end, however, based on the hieroglyphics found throughout these caverns and many of its relics, there's an individual by the name of Jordan. He's a professor of the Smithsonian. He and his team concluded the residents were Egyptians. Egyptians in the southwestern United States.
Wow.
Now, all that being said, you can't run with all this information, think, yeah, this is great, this is true, this. The Smithsonian's Department of Anthropology had searched his records, but to no avail found any mention of a Professor Jordan or an explorer Kincaid, or even a lost Egyptian civilization in Arizona. Again, this doesn't deter from the story being told time and time again. It still gets reiterated and discussed and talked about in books and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty current. There was I'm not going to go too far into conspiracies, but there was a whole bunch of other...
We're deep in conspiracies here at Cryptid Clues.
What am I saying? What am I thinking? There were talks about how a lot of these things that Kincaid and Jordan had found were Egyptian urns. And like I mentioned, a whole bunch of little Egyptian statues and gold and everything. And it was brought out, and they were loading dozens and dozens of boxes full of this gold and all these different items, and they shipped it out. Eventually, it was taken into possession by the United States government, went to Washington, and never seen again.
The usual, the big cover-up, you know? And then it leaves us in the realm of, well, did it or didn't happen? We'll never know.
Exactly. It's really fascinating because we have so much documented history on Europe and those central countries in Central Asia and everything that's going on thousands and thousands of years ago. Most of the things that take place in the Bible are taking place, in Europe and that whole continent out there. When you look at the North American continent, yes, we have a lot of South American history. We have a lot of like culture in Mexico and everything we can look at. But when you look at North America, you look at United States and you look at Canada, we don't have 1,000-year-old pyramids. We don't have like a lot of history. Like you come over here, it just feels like it's a fresh new place. Like people don't come over here to see our historical landmarks. I mean, what do we have? It's all like new. We have natural landmarks like Niagara Falls. We have new modern ones like the CN Tower and those types of creations. But in short, like we don't have that history. So what history we did have that's being kept from us? What history do we have that is being hidden, or like what really was existing here? And I'm not saying
like
that's
the farthest back I can think of, like on this side, is the Aztecs.
Aztecs, yes, and even then, that's a little bit more heading south on this continent. Yeah. Now, I don't mean this in any disrespect towards native tribes or native individuals that have been living here for generations upon generations, because that is cemented in our history. That is the culture that we have here for sure. But I'm thinking predating that, like way before that, like what were the foundations of those cultures? And I'm curious because I know they must have a rich history on the formation of their tribes and their people and how it relates to their gods and everything. But I want to go thousands and thousands of years before that And we really, at least to my knowledge, we don't have much concrete insight into that. At least it's not being taught. And if it does exist out there amongst native culture, that's something that I hope could be brought into schools and to properly be taught. Because as far as I know, the history books for Canada and most of the states in America only go back so far.
Yeah, no, you make a good point there. We really don't explore that side of history at all. Everything is pretty much like from Europe and beyond. It's not here and on this side of the globe at all.
Exactly. So when someone starts talking about how Egyptian artifacts were found inside a cave in the Grand Canyon, it
really
gets
piques your
me.
curiosity.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It really makes you think about like the possibility of that too. What's a quick and easy way to explain that conspiracy wise? You could think maybe too like that story of like the Roman soldier who leaned into a wall and apparently was like warped way somewhere else, and he had a boat back to Rome or whatever, and it was like, yeah, I just leaned against a wall and I got transported somewhere else. I didn't speak the language. It was very confusing. That's just a story. We don't know if that happened. Can't really explain it besides like portals and magic and conspiracy stuff. But imagine that happening to like a group of Egyptians. They're just out there in Egypt leaning against a pyramid or something or whatever, and they walk into like a fancy shimmery hole, or they just go boop and disappear, and they're on another side of the planet.
Well, that is another interesting thing that you mentioned, that there was, in some of the research I found, individuals that had come across basically rock walls that they walked into, literally walked right into, like it was like an illusion, and it pulled them into this advanced like area. Then a lot of this was attributed to the legend of this area, where you have the ability to just get completely healed if you were super ill, stuff like that, which is a reflection of advanced technology. Needless to say,
Aliens,
exactly. And on that note too, again, you sent me this imagery here of the mantis aliens, which look absolutely terrifying. One would think grays, but yeah, they got like the hands like a mantis.
Honestly, even with the grays or something, if they had any kind of like a mandible or whatever, you'd think it was like an ant.
You really, really would.
And I'm not trying to explain away from it being some kind of weird new cryptid thing or just ant people or upright ants or whatever. I mean, any possibility exists. It's all at the same time. You can't pick and choose a theory without any evidence. This is just pointless back and forth talking about stuff that we've read and seen or whatever. But I would just like to quickly think that it could be aliens, because that makes it really interesting. Mm-hmm. And then now I'm thinking, oh, what kind of aliens could they have been? What kind of things could have happened? What other fancy conspiracies explain this conspiracy and just make it even muddier and more interesting?
Well, I really do believe in the connection between Egyptians and aliens. I think there's a very strong association between those two factors. And when you look into the legend of the Hopi people here, like guided by an oddly shaped cloud during the day and then guided by a star at night, mm-hmm. That's very intriguing. It's a consistent thing in the sky that's moving and guiding them, right?
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And that was my first thought, was UFOs too.
Absolutely. So on that note again of the Grand Canyon, the vast majority of it is owned by the federal government, held in trust for the American people, and managed by a varied collection of federal agencies. Indian reservations, state land, and private land surround these federal lands. So the Grand Canyon, a large portion, is owned by the government, and they put out the statement again saying like, hey, we are protecting it from like people trying to be more invasive, like to damage the environment, the local species, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Wow, that was a lot of stuff so far. So far, we've talked about the planes and the apparitions and the ghosts. And we've gone into ant people, bugs life. We've talked about the Hopi people, ancient history that we don't know anything about from the Americas. Do we still have more about the Grand Canyon?
I got some more. You bet I do.
Holy crow. I think we should save that for after this next ad break. Welcome back, everybody. You know, I just love to interject with those sharp ones there, and I was trying to find a way to lead us into it. I think I failed that one. But Taylor, let's continue on. What else do we have going on in the Grand Canyon? I am floored by the amount of stuff that you found about this topic.
I'm a huge sucker for information on locations and just really digging into this. There was so much, and there still remains to be so much more content that I didn't include for this episode, but you can deep dive into it on your own time and you can find a lot of insight into it. So moving on from everything we've talked about, it's proven to be okay. There's something shaping up that is not adding up with this location. Again, like I mentioned, these two individuals that found these underground tunnels, I am a huge believer in the idea, and I've done a previous episode on this.
You've brought up the underground tunnels lots, actually.
Exactly, and I'm gonna just keep on reiterating it because that's my belief. So here it is again, prominently making an appearance in the Grand Canyon. So the Grand Canyon. It is a mile. This is a little information on basically it as a location. It is a mile-deep gorge in northern Arizona, measuring over 270 miles long and up to 18 miles wide. Scientists estimate the Grand Canyon may have formed about 5 to 6 million years ago when the Colorado River began to cut a channel through layers of rock. Humans have inhabited the area in and around the canyon since the last ice age. Coincidentally enough, that kind of pairs with the legend. First cataclysmic event of fire, then another one of ice, right?
I'd like to interject just for a moment here. You're talking about the size of the Grand Canyon and just going with miles and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, you could probably figure that out if you think about it. But an interesting fact is the Grand Canyon, if we're looking at height and width, you could hold 900 trillion footballs, apparently, according to Google. That doesn't help anyone know the height, width, or depth, or anything like that. It's just, I went and I Googled, how big is the Grand Canyon in football fields? And I got footballs as a result.
Specifically footballs. How many footballs was it again?
900 trillion.
That's a lot of bloody footballs.
Yeah,
Holy
right?
Shit. It's actually a good conversation starting. Just walk into a room like, it's about 900 trillion footballs to fill the Grand Canyon, right?
Such a weird unit of measurement, too. Football fields? Nah. We're talking footballs. How many? Oh, a lot.
Yes, so humans inhabited the area since the last ice age. It's one of the biggest canyons in the world. Archaeologists have discovered ruins and artifacts from inhabitants dating back nearly 12,000 years ago. Prehistoric humans first settled in and around the canyon, again during the last ice age, when mammoths, giant sloths, and other large mammals still roamed North America. Large stone spear points provide evidence of early human occupation. So, moving on from that, kind of getting into our closing out notes here, and of course, we had to add a little bit more cryptid conversation to this. And what's more cryptid than a Bigfoot-like monster that is associated with the Grand Canyon? The Mogollon monster, which is basically a very Bigfoot-like entity. Nearby the Grand Canyon, in the mountain range called the Mogollon Rim, is where this Bigfoot-like creature has been spotted within the state of Arizona. I have two sighting accounts that I'm going to cover here for you fine folks listening. First one, in 1903, a man named Stevens told the Arizona Republican newspaper that he came across an unknown creature near the Grand Canyon. Stevens described the creature as having long matted white hair on its head and a long white matted beard that grew down to its knees. The hair also covered the creature's entire body. Stevens came up upon it while it was kneeling next to a freshly killed cougar, eating it. Stevens noted how quiet he was and made no sudden movements that would have alerted the creature to his presence. Regardless, he realized the creature knew he was there. The creature turned and basically locked eyes with Stevens, and it immediately started howling this screech that Stevens said it was the most terrifying thing he ever heard, and he immediately got the hell out of there.
So when we're talking about this Mogollon monster, it's basically like Arizona Bigfoot then, or?
Basically. Exactly. Have you heard of this before?
I have not, but I was just looking it up here while you're talking about it, and honestly, like, there's so many random monsters and cryptids out there that are just it's just Bigfoot, it's just Sasquatch. It's the same exact thing, but all around the globe. It's crazy.
Well, that's just it. A lot of individuals have their specific terms depending on what part of the world they're from, and then it kind of isolates certain stories and encounters from being attributed, especially when you're looking things up. Like, it's kind of like, oh, we call a fork a thingamabob in this part of the world, and you're Googling forks trying to find information on forks. Well, you're not going to think like, okay, like these people that have thingamabobs have the most thingamabobs in the world over here. They're just everywhere, but you're not going to know that because it's a different term. So
Yeah, no, you make a very good point. When you're looking for any kind of background stories on cryptids or whatever, any kind of clue, haha, name drop. If you look for Sasquatch and Bigfoot, yeah, there's a lot of them, but there's almost twice as much if you add in all the other variations and subspecies and monster names and stuff like this, like the Mogollon monster.
exactly, that's exactly it. And for this monster, sightings of this creature, I found that they were actually traced in this general area all the way back to the early 1800s. And again, that's when settlers of the area started to run into this cryptid. The next sighting and experience I have for you guys starts off with a 13-year-old individual named Don Davis. He was a member of a scout troop. They were camping together. Don mentioned that his troop were all camping near the Tonto Creek when something woke him up. A few of his other, troop colleagues woke up as well in the middle of the night with him, but it's described in his words as someone was shuffling around through everyone's things. Don had assumed it was another one of the troop members, and he just shouted out to whoever it was, just get back to sleep. Suddenly, this intruder stopped and immediately turned to face Don in his direction.
Oh, that's spooky.
The figure approached Don, and he was still in his sleeping bag. This figure stopped above him, standing over him while he's in his sleeping bag. He literally curled up and just covered his head and was just in his sleeping bag, absolutely terrified, hoping this thing would leave. And eventually it did. Don assumed that it just lost interest in him as well as this campsite created by the whole troop. Don also recalled a horrendous odor coming from this creature, as well as many of its physical features being in relation with what other witnesses see in their encounters as well. And what witnesses see is a 7-foot tall, very large overall body build, covered in black or reddish hair that is long and matted. The face, hands, and chest appear to be without hair, but have a dark skin tone. The hair that's visible turns more dark gray, which is suspected to be kind of in relation to the age of these creatures. The heads are more square-like, and the eyes are prominent in the skull underneath a large brow. And again, the arms hanging down past the knees. These things are stated to be territorial and omnivorous. But many people that go camping in these areas often seem to report things are like something comes into their campsite, rummages through all of their stuff, leaves a big mess, and then just kind of departs the area.
Sneaky Sasquatch. That's a fun little game on your iPhones and stuff if you have one. I've been playing that a little bit. You get to sneak around as a Bigfoot, go through people's stuff, eat food. You go to like a picnic table and just eat everything and sneak around the park rangers and hide.
I'm going to have to install this game. It sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's free with Apple Arcade. I'm not shilling it for anything. We're not sponsored. I just wanted to say, hey, Cryptid Clues, Sasquatch stuff. I've been playing a Sasquatch game because there's like one.
Well, that is all the notes I have basically on that, but I'm just curious. What are your thoughts on this Mogollon monster in closing here?
I think, I've pretty much given you most of my thoughts when it came to like how it's just a subspecies name for Bigfoot, basically. It's just a Sasquatch. It's just a Bigfoot. The fact that it's its own little area, you can look up the Mogollon monster. I'm definitely going to look into that a little bit. And just in doing so, I see it's also named the Arizona Bigfoot. That's its secondary name. There's so much of that. And that's what I just can't get over is I would really like to see, like a Bigfoot Sasquatch hotspot map, but taking into account all of the other monster names and stuff like that. Because a Sasquatch hotspot map is only going to show you Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, maybe Orang Pendek, I don't know. You don't really get to see all the details. And like the stuff that we have is only based on those reports that call it those things. What about the rest? What about just big hairy creatures out in the woods? Something that's called by another monster name in one specific area. Like, I wonder how thick that map can get if you were to add all of that stuff in. I think it would really help change a lot of people's minds and open some people up to the idea of there being this stuff living out there.
Absolutely. And that's just on the surface too. When you take into account networks of caves underground and everything along those lines, I mean, I imagine you could double, maybe triple the amount of sightings that would be condensing onto this map you're speaking to. So
yeah, absolutely. Look at the end of Expedition Bigfoot, for instance, where they go into caves and they find a little bit of evidence. It seems to be that there's lots of stuff about underground caves and networks and stuff between mountains that's probably where these things are living now. If they're not out in a certain remote location and they're a little bit closer to where people can get at them, they're going to go play in a cave.
yeah, absolutely. Well, in closing for myself, like the Grand Canyon has a lot of mystery to it, and it just remains to be a very mysterious place where is there government cover up? Are there paranormal aspects associated with this? Is there a rich history associated with Egyptian culture? Like there's so many questions, and again, not a concrete amount of evidence as per the norm when dealing with any of these topics, but there is still enough of an indication just to kind of let your mind wonder what if, and just think like, God, what really could be going on there? Again, there's so much more information you can find by going and just Googling and looking into this kind of stuff for yourself. But I hope that this episode has been a good condensed little bit of concrete information that you can kind of just put in your back pocket and just kind of think like, hey, that was cool. And
definitely not quite as concrete as the Grand Canyon itself, but the concept is there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it. That's all I got.
Alrighty, folks. Well, Taylor, if you want to, take us through some plugs again. Talk about, our wonderful Patreon where you can listen ad-free and get some special stuff as well. That way, I just talk about an ad break sharply, and you get a second of silence, and then I resume. I'll let you handle the rest.
I mean, yeah, like Patreon is a great time. There, you get some episodes that are exclusively available on the Patreon feed, and you get again, all episodes available there early, ad free. The Campfire Clues episodes are available on one of the higher tiers, early and ad free. So there's a little bit of variety there for everyone. Shouts to Kapruka, our Patreon, and you can find us on social media, Cryptid Clues on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and you can also find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca. And again, if you have questions, just want to chat or reach out, by all means, send us an email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. And with that, we're out of here.
Bye, everyone.